So Sword and Shield and Greatsword is currently just by far the best tanking combo in Throne and Liberty. It does not matter if for PvE or for PvP. But I know the game can feel sometimes really overwhelming at the beginning. You might not know what skills to take, how you should upgrade your spells and what gear you should take. But don't you worry, I've got you covered in this guide. In this guide we will focus on building the perfect Sword and Shield plus Greatsword build for tanking in dungeons. Before we come to the build, let's start first with some basics. When it comes to tanking in dungeons, of course your main priority is trying to generate a lot of threat that all the monsters are attacking you. So how do you generate threat in Throne and Liberty? As in most MMOs, through dealing damage. But additionally, just a lot of your spells are also generating additional threat. For a few of those you need to do some skill specialization first, but then you can have plenty of skills that generate a lot of threat. And to be honest, you can just slot all of these spells into your bar, smash your head on your keyboard and you will hold aggro and master every dungeon. So if you just want to get somehow through the dungeon, just copy some random build and you're going to be fine. So if this is already enough for you, go ahead. But maybe, just maybe, you are like me and you love to min-max stuff and you want to be the best tank for your team. So not only holding aggro but also supporting and dealing damage at the same time. If this is something for you, then you're here at the right place. Okay, so let's come to the skills. First of all, you can optimize your stuff if you do two builds, one for trash and one for the end boss. But I personally hate to waste two presets just for PvE. That's why I made myself a build where I just have to change two spells when I come to the end boss. And that's okay for me, better than wasting a second preset for that. Okay, let's see what we need. Let's first have a look onto the defensive spells from the Sword and Shield. We have Bastion, which buffs all our party members in range with a damage reduction buff. Especially in the early game, this spell can give a lot of value in mechanics. That's why I would always take this spell. The next defensive spell is Immortal Pride. Increase our max HP for a certain time. In some situations that could be of course really good, but in most cases it's just really useless in PvE. Then we have Counter Barrier, where we get additional block chance and if we block, our attacker gets some damage back. So it's really good for trash mobs, especially when you're doing bigger pulls. Like the additional block chance just gives us a lot of more tankiness. So if you don't know what this block chance is, no problem, we will talk about this later more in detail. Okay, but Counter Barrier is a really good spell we always want to take. Okay, now let's come to the damage spells from the SNS. So first we have Shield Strike. It's a simple single target damage attack which generates a lot of aggro. And the nice thing about this spell is that the cooldown of the spell is also being reduced if you are hit in Counter Barrier. It's just a really nice ability which we can spam all the time. Next up we have Shield Throw. So Shield Throw throws your shield on the enemy and hits him 2 times. It also gives us additional heavy attack chance, which is in theory not bad, but it just holds for 2 seconds. Which is nice to get maybe some additional burst, but of course burst is something what we really don't need so much in PvE. So the damage is okay, but the cooldown is way too long for that. Then we have Annihilating Slash or something like this, I don't know, I can't pronounce this as a German. The spell just deals some okayish AOE damage around you, which is really nothing special, where we have better options. A Shot of Victory deals quite a bit of damage and hires the damage of our SNS skills, but only for a short duration, which is in theory really good, but we won't take a lot of damage spells from the SNS, therefore it's just really not good enough. And the last damage spell we have is Witty Strike. The skill hits up to 3 people in front of you, dealing just a little bit of damage and gives you mana back. Again, really not so special. When it comes to damage spells, the Greatsword has just better options. Okay, but let's see what kind of utility spells we have here from the SNS. First up we have your Strategic Rush. It's a mobility spell which pushes all enemies into a certain direction. Additionally, and this is important, it gives us 40 base damage if you use it against a boss. And 40 base damage if you just hit level 50 is crazy. And you anyways want to have always one mobility spell. So there is another mobility spell from the Greatsword which you can take. And this is also a really good mobility spell because it gives you additional heavy attack chance. So both spells are insanely good. But with 2 mobility spells we would just block too much of our spells. But because I love to min-max stuff, I always use Precision Dash for trash mobs so that we get the additional heavy attack chance. And for boss fights I take then Strategic Rush instead. So then I have this additional 40 base damage increase, which is just way stronger in boss fights. So this is now one of our 2 spells which I will always change when I come to a boss fight. Alright, next spell we have is Chain Hook. It can hook an enemy towards us, which is really strong for killing trash, because you always want to group stuff so you can AoE them down. It's just way easier with this spell to clump all of the mobs. So something we always want to take. Then we have Provoking Roar, which is a classical taunt which applies a provoke effect on all our enemies around us. This provoke effect first of all taunts all the mobs, but there's also a nice passive we will take which also amplifies then a lot of damage to those provoked targets. The taunt is of course really good and we always want to take it. Then we have Fierce Clash, which can push enemies against each other. Through that we can deal them some additional damage. It's not a bad spell, but it's just really nothing we need in PvE. Okay, now let's come to the Greatsword. And first let's have a look on all the utility spells we have here. We have a single target stun called Stunning Blow, which not only applies a stun to the enemy, but to bosses it also applies the effect Shocked. So the Greatsword has a lot of effects where it deals bonus damage if the enemy is stunned or shocked. And since this is the only spell where we can apply the shocked effect, we always want to take Stunning Blow because it will heavily impact our damage on bosses. Okay, but the second stun is Devastating Smash, which is a huge AoE stun, which is just giga broken in PvP. But since it's not applying the shocked status, it's just not so good in PvE. So we won't take it. Then we have Da Vinci's Courage, which increases our max HP, increases our HP generation, and most importantly, it hires the attack speed from all our team members. Attack speed is just such a strong stat because you're getting your spells way faster out. And 15% for all of our teammates is just so huge. Something we always want to take. Then we have Will Breaker, which decreases the defense of our enemies. If we lower the defense from the boss, for example, then your whole team will deal more damage. Those kind of spells are always a must-have in PvE. And lastly, we have Blood Devotion. Here we can take incoming damage onto one of our teammates and redirect the damage to us. So this damage redirection is really not needed in PvE. But the spell gets later on some really crazy upgrades which we have to take. That's why we will always take this spell. Okay, now we have only 2 slots left. And this of course we have to fill now with some damage spells. First we have 2 high single target spells, Death Blow and Guillotine Blade, which both deal additional damage against shocked targets. So after we use our stun we will deal additional damage with those spells. And for boss fights I would take both of these spells. But for trash mobs I would only take Guillotine Blade. So Guillotine Blade we can later on make also to an AoE spell, which is way better for trash mobs. But Death Blow is still a really good spell, so I would always change the spell for Chain Hook for boss fights. And for the last spell I would take here the Line Brawl, where we hit 3 times in a row. This spell is really good because it also has a really short cooldown and we need in our build just spells that we can more constantly spam. And the last 2 skills are Devastating Tornado and Devastating Smash. Both are really good AoE spells, but it's just really not good in dungeons. If you're doing really crazy pulls with your pre-made group, then of course these spells can be really good, but other than that there's really no reason to take them. These would be now my spells for trash mobs. Now for bosses I would always change Precision Dash for Strategic Rush and Chain Hook for Death Blow, which would give me just a lot more single target damage. But of course you don't have to do that, only if you really want to min-max stuff. Okay, now let's come to the skill specialization. Okay, first of all we have more than enough points. So there are a lot of builds where you are really short on those points. But luckily this is not one of those. That makes everything a lot easier. Okay, so let's go through it. First we will just take all the upgrades where we get additional aggro. We don't need all of those, but if we have the points, let's also just use it. So we are upgrading Shield Strike, Stunning Blow, Will Breaker and Violent Brawl. Just because of those spells we will never lose aggro in a boss fight. So usually it's all about single target damage, but for trash mobs it's also nice to have a little bit of AoE. And a lot of skills we can upgrade that they deal AoE damage. And again we do this because we have so many points. So we upgrade Shield Strike, Violent Brawl and Guillotine Blade. So all of these spells now have also the ability to deal crazy amount of AoE damage. Just helps us really nicely to clear up group of monsters way faster. Okay, but let's finish now all the skill specializations from SNS. So first of all, for counter barrier we take here also the base damage increase, which is a no-brainer, it's just really good. So we also can take here the additional cooldown reduction for shield strike if we are getting hit. It's again really good for clearing trash, that's why we of course also take it. Okay, for provoking roar our taunt we take cooldown decrease and increased duration, which of course just helps if we lose aggro from monsters or whatsoever. For strategic rush we don't need any upgrades. And for Bastion there's one good upgrade which would change the spell to instead giving damage reduction, it now gives your whole party a damage boost. As soon as people are getting better in dungeons, getting better gear and so on, you will always take that. Because you just don't need the additional damage reduction, but you want additional damage for your team. But at the beginning I won't take that, but just keep that in mind that you can change that later on. Okay, let's come to the rest of the Greatsword skills. For Violent Brawl we take the upgrade which hires our damage for 2 seconds. Later on you will be able to spam the spell, and with a lot of buff duration you will have this buff all the time up on you. So just really good, we always want to take that. For Precision Dash you take only the upgrade which increases your heavy attack buff duration by 1.5 seconds, which is in the end a 50% increase, which is giga strong. For Stunning Blow we only take here the reduced cooldown. This way we can just have the shock effect more often on bosses, which will heavily increase our damage. For Da Vinci's Courage we for sure take here the higher duration. As mentioned, attack speed is broken and giving this buff longer to our whole team is just insane. Then I would also take instant healing. It's not really needed, but if you have a bad healer at the beginning it can come really handy. And it just costs you 3 points, so it's really not a big deal. For Willbreaker I would not take any further upgrades. Guillotine Blade and Death Blow you can both change to a chargeable spell, which deals more damage if you charge them longer. That sounds great in theory and it's really good in PvP because it really gives you nice burst. But in PvE it's all about DPS, so damage per second. Usually we can use the spell instant and we can already do the next spell and so on. And as soon as people understand how to do PvE, a lot of bow players will play with Deadly Marker. So if you don't know the skill Deadly Marker, essentially it just reduces the cooldown of all your party members. It's currently just a giga broken skill in PvE, and that's just the reason why you will always have abilities to spam. And just charging these spells will lose you damage in the long run. So yes, you will always take that in PvP, but if you want to min-max stuff in PvE, you won't take that. But we will take the cooldown decrease of both spells, which is of course really good. And now we'll come to the last skill, Blood Devotion. Here we will take 3 out of the 4 upgrades. First we change it that we not only can connect it to one of our teammates, but now to all of our teammates. Then we are increasing the effect duration, and all of that just because we want to increase the base damage of all of our teammates by 50. As already mentioned, base damage is broken. And especially in the early game, all your spells scale out of your base damage. Means this spell is insanely good. And again, if you have a lot of bow users in your group all playing with Deadly Marker, then you will have this spell also really often up. Okay, now you have still a few points left here that you can use however you want. For example, you can use it for Bastion upgrade or whatsoever, but there are not really any other upgrades which you need. Okay, let's come to the passives. For passive it's actually pretty easy. From SNS we take Resilient Mind. That's just so good because it gives us mana if we block passively or actively damage. The mana we are getting is a percentage of the blocked damage. So if you block for example a Fury attack with your Q block, and this Fury attack would have dealt a lot of damage, then we're also gaining a lot of mana back. And especially in boss fights you will do that quite a few times. So essentially in dungeons we have with this spell infinite mana. Then we take Aegis Shield, which hires all our defensive values depending on our shield block chance. Which is just really good, especially in combination with Counter Barrier, where we higher our block chance. So especially if we do big pulls and then use Counter Barrier, we will just gaining a lot of additional armor. Now the last passive we take here from the SNS is Spectrum of Agony. Okay, so you can get the provoke effect onto monsters with the skill Provoking Roar. So that's your taunt. Now if you attack a provoked target, then it deals additional damage to the provoked target itself, but also to all targets around it. So this becomes really good if you do bigger pulls. You're using your taunt on all of these and then you're using your AOE spells onto all of those taunted targets. I will also show you later on a simple AOE farm method, which you just have to know as a Greatsword SNS player. Okay, the other passes we won't take. Skillful Evasion would give us a little bit evasion, which is not bad, but they are just better things we can take. Jurate Patience hires the CC resistance. This is completely useless. impenetrable? I don't know what this is for a word, but I for sure can't pronounce it. Here we are getting additional defense when we have more enemies around us, which is just really good in large scale PvP, but not really needed in PvE. And then we have Moral Boost, which reduces our cooldown when we are colliding a target with, for example, Strategic Rush, which is nice, but there are for sure better things. Now the Greatsword has some great passives. Robust Constitution just hires flat our max HP, which is of course really nice. Vital Force hires our crit chance, stun chance, and most importantly our skill damage boost. And all of this depending on our max life. This is of course really good because we will stack a lot of max HP. And now Cold Warrior is the passive I've already teased now, which just hires our heavy attack chance if we attack a stunned or a shocked target. As a reminder, we are shocking our boss with Stunning Blow, which then hires the damage of our Death Blow and our Guillotine Blade. But now we additionally hire the overall heavy attack chance by a crazy amount. This is by far the most important passive which we always have to take, because it will just hire our DPS immensely. Okay, then we take Raging Frenzy, which gives us even more skill damage boost if 3 or more enemies are around us. Of course, that's most of the time only good for trash mods, but for that it's really good. And the last one we take is Indomitable Armor, which gives us additional armor when we are taking damage. Not really something to say here, it's just really good. Victorious Moral would give us mana back if we deal damage with a spell, which we don't really need anymore because we have already a passive for mana. Then we could also get some additional movement speed if we use a mobility spell. If you're kind of a speedrunner, then of course this comes handy, but other than that there's really no need to take it. Now we need to discuss the defensive skill. At the beginning, you always want to take here the block from the Sword and Shield, because you are getting healed from it, you're getting a shield, and you will be just overall way more tanky, which will help you especially when your gear is not so good and the healers are bad to get through all of those dungeons. But especially the tier 1 dungeons will get really easy, really fast, and I just like to do then those dungeons as fast as possible. And the Greatsword block is just so good for that. It can give skill damage boost, heavy attack chance, and can stun or even shock the target. This block will just crazy buff our damage, especially in boss fights. But for the beginning, always stay here with the Sword and Shield defensive spell. Okay, that would be my setup, which I will go for in most dungeons. Of course, sometimes I adjust things a little. In Death Abyss, for example, I want to have more CC also during the trash and so on. So small adjustments, but overall that's my complete setup. Okay, let's come to the masteries, starting here with the SNS. For PvE it's pretty easy, you will always go for the middle tree, which gives you additional damage and defenses against bosses. Which is of course really good, it's just designed for PvE. So you will always take that. So I'm still not sure if we have 13 or 16 points on release. Because in Korea we started with 13 points and then after a few months we got 16. So I'm not sure how many points we will get, but if you want to get 16 then you always want to get the additional shield block chance. Okay, let's come to the Greatsword. So if you want to decide on which tree you want to go, you always look onto the 3 last major points. Here we can get movement speed, cooldown speed or heavy attack chance. And it's really simple, heavy attack chance is by far the best for PvE, because it will just hire our damage immensely, so we will always take it. So the last points really doesn't matter too much in PvE. I would put 5 points into the top tree to get the additional defense, and 1 point into the middle tree to get additional mana rack. Okay, but that's it, all you need to know for the masteries. Okay, let's come to the gear. In Throne Liberty, gear progression happens in phases, starting with green, then blue, then Epic 1 and finally Epic 2 gear. Epic 2 gear won't release for the next 2 to 4 months after launch, so we don't need to worry about this just yet. For PvE gear, green and blue gear isn't too critical. Pick whatever looks good for you. But when it comes to Epic gear, Amazon and NCSoft changed a lot to the Korean version. They changed the drop locations, or we don't even know where certain items will drop. We're just missing some of those key information. So it's really hard to give you here a full epic build right now. But I will give you here certain items, for example the weapons and some gear pieces that you can look out for. And just in general I will explain you on what you have to look out for. And I will finalize then the build in the next weeks. Okay, the first thing you need to understand is that for PvE you don't need any crazy tank gear. Because at the beginning these tier 1 dungeons are not super hard. Yes, we want to be tanky, but also want to deal a lot of damage. And what gives us a lot of damage? Base stats. In PvE you want to have good base stats, because base stat influence your base damage, and the base damage is always the basis for the calculation of all of your skills. That's why in PvE we always want to take items with high base stats. Okay, let's start with the weapons. Okay, first of all, when it comes to weapons, it's always important to look on the base damage of the weapon, because as mentioned already, it is super important. And especially for Sword and Shield, it's also important to look on the block chance. Okay, so what is the block chance? Block chance gives you the chance to passively block an attack and reduce the damage by 40%. Does not matter if it's a magic, a ranged or a melee attack. And the different Sword and Shields have just different block chances. So this is something you always should look out for. For PvE it's not so important, but I think it's still important to understand. So an easy to get but still really good SNS is Carnix. It's just a well-rounded Sword and Shield which you will always take in the beginning. For the Greatsword we have two different easy to get options. We have the Duke Magna's Fury Warblade and Duke Magna's Provoking Warblade. Fury Warblade gives really good cooldown reduction and additionally heavy attack chance. And Provoking Warblade gives more life and can even apply an additional taunt. I know for a fact that a lot of people will go here for the taunting one, but it's really not good, because the effect is just so unnecessary. Because the weapon is just really outdated. The skill specialization came afterwards, and now this whole effect is completely useless. You will always go for the Fury Warblade. So for your armor it's really hard, because as mentioned I really don't know where the stuff will drop. But no worries, I will update this guide in the next weeks. And I will also update the build on Questlog. The link for that will be in the video description. But there are two sets you should have an eye on. There's the general set, which hires our heavy attack chance by 150 if we have two pieces of the set. This is just such an incredible good set and will heavily increase our damage. Another good set, a little bit more defensive, is the commander set, which gives us just additional damage reduction or even more shield block chance. Both really good sets, but we don't know where all the items will drop. But we already know it will be different from what we had in Korea. For the accessories we know already for the most part where the items will drop. Some of them you can already get from the beginning, for some others you have to wait for a few weeks till you can actually farm them, because you will need to farm them in the open world dungeons, and those won't be all available from the beginning. But these items will be a really good start here for you. Okay, one last thing I want to mention here for the gear, because a lot of people would ask me should I build evasion or endurance on a tank. And in PvE I wouldn't build endurance nor would I build evasion. If you also want to do PvP, then it's something different, but if you just want to do PvE, then it's really not needed. I would not trade endurance or evasion. Yes, you can go for defensive stats like max HP, damage reduction and so on. It's really good, but wasting Lucent for building evasion or endurance is just really a waste. Especially in tier 1 gear. Sell those items on the marketplace, make a ton of Lucent and save this Lucent till we get to tier 2 gear. When we will have tier 2 gear, then we will also have the tier 2 dungeons. And we will also get the challenge mode with the 30 different difficulties. And then we can discuss this topic again. But right now in tier 1, please for the love of God, don't waste your Lucent as a PvE player. Sell all evasion and endurance stats to the PvP players. Save up your Lucent till tier 2 gear. That's just my honest recommendation. Okay, so much for the gear for now. As mentioned, I will do an update video in the next weeks. Okay, now let's quickly talk about stats. So first, what you always want to have is 50 points into strength as soon as possible, just because it gives you 100 additional heavy attack chance, which is just really strong, and you always want to have that as soon as possible. Most of the other stats you will put completely into dexterity. It just hires your crit chance and your attack speed, and it's by far the best when it comes to dealing damage. Like, depending on your gear and how far you are away from 40 points of perception, you can also take here the 5% buff duration, which is generally also really good, but it really depends on how many points you have to put into perception. But overall, it's just important to focus on getting 50 points into strength and then put all the other points mostly into dex. All you need to know for the stats. Okay, let's come to some final tips. Tanking is really not super hard in Throne of Liberty, but I have 4 nice tips for you. Okay, first tip. Don't stress too much if you don't have aggro of all the trash mobs. It's not a big deal. Everyone can tank a few mobs. Of course you want to tank them as a tank, it's just not a big deal if people having aggro from 1 or 2 mobs. So just important, don't stress about it. Secondly, always have your sword and shield as primary weapon at the beginning. This is because only then you are able to block attacks with your shield, and this will heavily reduce the damage you are getting. Third tip. At the beginning, healers are sometimes a little special, or they just haven't watched my healer guide. To make it a little bit easier for them, you can also block some attacks of the monsters manually. So let's say you're doing a big pull, you have aggro of all the monsters, but then you are not getting any heals, because the healer haven't selected you and healed himself, or whatsoever. Now you can use your Q block, so your manual block, to block for a short time all the attacks from the monsters. Always keep that in mind, it can buy a lot of time for the healer. And the last tip, for trash mobs, it's just always super important that you group all of the monsters. You can more easy AOE them down and it's easier for you to hold aggro. But people will always start attacking mobs before you have actually pulled. And then it's really hard to get a good pull, and if the pull is not good, then it will take longer to actually clear all the mobs. But what you can do is to be a little bit ahead of your team. If you see the last mod of the group is about to die, dash directly into the next group and do your pull. And this way a stupid mage can't pull all the mobs away. And doing a good pull makes everything just way better. Of course, maybe don't do this when you do the dungeon for the first time, but this will make you look like you are a really good tank after a while. Okay, but that's it. Tanking is really not too hard. As mentioned, you just have to smash your hand on your keyboard and you will be totally fine. Okay, let's come to the last part of this video, where we will talk about solo AOE farming. Something which every SNS and Greatsword player has to understand. It's nothing complicated, but you have to understand it. So what do you need for that? You only need one passive, and that's Spectrum of Agony, the Taunt Provoking Roar, and Devastating Tornado. So the idea of this farming method is that you pull as many mobs as possible. Then you are taunting all of them at the same time with Provoking Roar, which will give all of them the provoke effect. If we now deal damage to them, the passive effect will trigger on each of them. Means that on each hit they are getting, they are exploding and will deal damage to all monsters in an area. The nice thing about Devastating Tornado is that it's a great AOE spell that hits a lot of times. Means those monsters will just explode a lot of times. And the more monsters you have pulled, the more damage you will do. So this is really just a basic combo. Now you can of course optimize your stuff by reducing the armor with Will Breaker beforehand, or increasing the heavy attack chance with Shield Throw, or buffing your heavy attack chance with Precision Dash, or whatsoever. There's so many possibilities how you could optimize your rotation, but I'm sure you will find a way that works the best for you. Okay, but that's it. Hopefully some of that was really helpful for you. As mentioned, regarding the gear, I will have an updated video in the next weeks. I will be also maining SNS and Greatsword on release. Even though I will be heavily focusing on PvP, I also love to min-max stuff for PvE. So I will always keep you here updated on this channel. If there are further questions, feel free to ask me anything in the comment section. If you like the content and want to support me, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.